The people who run Formula One racing made drivers and fans really mad again. This happened at the Spa Grand Prix, and everyone got angry. When they delayed the race, it really hurt the drivers who had set up their cars for rainy weather and ruined their day. But could the F1 bosses have done something different to stop this? And more importantly, how did rain become such a scary thing for a sport that used to love racing in it? The fight between F1 drivers and the F1 bosses got even worse after the Belgian Grand Prix. This happened mainly because of how the people in charge handled the race. Everyone could see that the really heavy rain when the race started was going to delay things, but nobody expected them to wait for the rain to completely stop before starting the race again. I don't think this is the right way to go racing, especially when you have champions who are amazing in the rain, like Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Just look at what happened last year at Interlagos. The championship was basically decided there because Verstappen did something incredible after starting from 17th place. And listen, nobody is saying the race should happen when it's not safe. That's not what anyone wants. But here's an idea that F1 teams don't really like talking about: using the wet weather tires. The tires with blue stripes haven't been used nearly as much as they should be. They literally didn't use them at all in the last few races, when rain was a big part of what happened. Even during the warm-up lap, the drivers were using the medium rain tires even though the conditions weren't right for the green-striped tires. Obviously, the real problem is much bigger than this. The F1 bosses don't want racing when rain becomes too big of a factor. Are they scared of something? We had 2 drivers die here in 2019 and 2023 in the smaller racing series when Hubert and van der Hoff lost their lives. So it makes sense to put the driver's safety first. However, we're talking about Formula One, which is supposed to be the best racing in the world. The drivers are angry because they were tricked into thinking they would race in the rain. But then they went out and saw the F1 bosses waiting for the track to get dry before letting them race. This is something that Max Verstappen talked about, and when he explained it more, he said, "Well, stopping the start is kind of silly. I mean, you should just drive a few laps. Jesus, they are way too careful. Now the heavy rain is coming, and it's going to be a 3-hour delay." They were very careful, which we talked about after Silverstone, to be a bit more careful. But for me, this was going too far the other way. It just ruined a race, a classic wet race too. We either still try to have a real wet race or we say, you know what? Let's just stop racing in the wet and wait for it to be dry. But that's not what you want, right? We can still have some really cool wet racing like we showed at Silverstone. To be honest, the conditions weren't exactly the same if you compare these 2 racetracks, but at the end of the day, what matters most is that Max has a good point. Wet weather racing is slowly disappearing right in front of us. What this means is that F1 drivers can't show off their skills anymore because of how the race directors are handling these problems during the whole weekend. We knew we would have a rain-soaked race on Sunday. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that the drivers and teams set up their cars for wet weather, but then the F1 bosses waited for the track to dry before they let them race. That's really hard to understand. And sorry for saying this, but that's literally killing the spirit of the sport. Besides Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton had something to say about how the race director started the race. The 7-time world champion thinks we should have had a normal start, not a rolling start. There was almost a dry line at the starting area. Explaining this more, Hamilton said, "We definitely could have done a normal start, especially at the end there. It was almost a dry line. It was hard to see in the spray, so we definitely could have done it." When you have 2 world champions criticizing your decisions and moves, you know something is really wrong. And because of this, I really think the F1 bosses need to look at themselves and make changes very soon. Ben Mohammed Salami is ruining the sport as we know it. The rain factor has always been welcome in the sport. People call it the great equalizer. And not only that, but it also gives us conditions where teams have to use their strategies properly. You could have a wet first section, a dry middle section, and a medium-wet third section, and it still doesn't mean racing shouldn't happen. And what do we get at the end of this whole mess? Well, I'll tell you. Teams with high downforce setups because they expected to drive in the rain, and they had to be happy with positions way below what they deserved. Sainz and Verstappen are two of those drivers. And while the Dutch driver finished a solid fourth place, I don't think he'd be happy with how everything happened at Spa from the F1 boss's side. Even TV hosts like Jeremy Clarkson are worried about what the directors at F1 are doing, saying that changes are needed very soon if we want to see racing. And we need to start with one very basic problem: using the wet tires. I don't know why it's so hard to understand that we have tires that can clear water really fast. These tires help drivers see better and help them clear the standing water quickly enough to have clean racing. So what does this leave us with? First, the future of Spa in Formula One. No matter how legendary it is, no matter how great racing it brings to the sport every time we go there, F1 could use the weather situation to push their story. Hitches to kick Spa out of the calendar. There have been growing worries that the Belgian Grand Prix won't be on the calendar anymore. And even if it is, it will take turns with another racetrack over several years, which is the first step toward the new contract it signed. In this contract, we won't see racing there in 2028 and 2030. Of course, until then, a lot can change. And Africa's growing interest is also pushing the idea of having their own race on the calendar. So all of this is bad news for F1 drivers and fans. What can be done to stop this? Obviously, a lot more pressure needs to be put on Mario Isola, who is the president of Pirelli. You can't have a tire with blue stripes that's supposed to be the best tire in conditions like we had at Spa, and not even have teams think about using it. This tire cleans water and gives better grip like no other in such conditions. And for you to not use it is just plain stubbornness. Another very important thing that needs to be talked about is whether the F1 bosses are ready to organize races when they know rain is coming. I know it sounds silly. We've seen some of the most legendary racetracks give us racing like no other when rain is involved. But here at Spa, we were put in a position to think that when it rains, we're going to have a canceled weekend. And I honestly don't think that's the right way to move forward in Formula One. It just kills the mood of the drivers, the fans, and the media, who were really excited to watch a race like the amazing ones from the old days. After all, the drivers know better than anyone else. And if the F1 bosses and the race director made some stronger and braver decisions, I believe we would have had some nice racing in Belgium. Like this, we've been left with literally nothing. The biggest worry was that teams had been tricked into bringing setups for rain, and then the F1 bosses decided to wait for the track to completely dry and literally disappoint the teams as much as possible. Changes are needed and they couldn't come sooner. This week in Budapest, the early weather forecast says rain could come on Sunday, which would automatically mean that nearly the same conditions from Spa might mess up the race in Hungary as well. If the F1 bosses allow one more mess-up like this, then some serious talks will need to happen between Ben Salami and the F1 drivers. Because at the end of the day, the drivers should have a real say when it comes to racing in damp conditions with limited visibility. With all of this in mind, do you think the F1 bosses have tricked teams into waiting for the track to dry? This ultimately means we won't be allowed to see racing in wet conditions in the near future. And if so, what do you think is the solution for this? Let us know in the comments below. And once you do that, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.